Hi, and welcome back to the 3Q podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and I'm very excited for you to be here and tune in to a brand new episode. Tonight, I had the pleasure of interviewing Todd Roberts, the head of A&R and founder of Amour Fou Music, LLC, and Good Egg Music. So without further ado, let's get right into tonight's interview. I'll see you at the end. Well, Todd, it's so great to have you on the podcast. So excited to have you here. How are you doing?
I'm good, and it's great to be here. Yeah, I mean, Rachel, we go back a little bit, and yeah, I enjoy our talks. I'll
Oh,
put it that
thank
way.
you. I also enjoy our talks. Well, are you ready for this first question?
Of course.
All right, let's get into it. Imagine you're sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What's one piece of advice that you would give him both personally and professionally, and why?
It's the old adage, I think, of yeah, just have some confidence in yourself. That's the main thing I would probably tell that person. And that sounds a little trite. That sounds like what my dad would say to me. So I'd probably say something more like, trust the weird stuff that you're into a little bit sooner. That's something that's consistently throughout my career has been, I look back and I think about the things I missed out on, the things that I actually, found early and then didn't, I either couldn't sell very well into the room or I just didn't have faith in my own instincts. And I think, yeah, I tell myself, just stick with it and you're not wrong. Um, because I'm not always right, of course, not everybody can be, but it's betting on something unique. It's something that you can singularly, point to and say, this moves me, that this inspires me. And then, it's partly figuring out why, I think that's a big thing that you don't always know as a 25-year-old. But as a slightly older person now, I'm sort of seeing, well, I had it right there in front of me. I probably could have had more patience with myself to sit and explain or at least even point to like what I felt the trends were telling me. Because I was a magazine editor for years and that's kind of what I did early on as a 25-year-old, ironically, is that's what I was doing. So I was left to my own devices. So I was kind of already doing that. And then when people started hiring me to do label stuff and I became an A&R person, that kind of stopped because I no longer had that open platform. I kind of used meetings and phone calls with my boss to sort of tell the tale of what I was finding and it didn't quite translate as much. I think they just, assumed that somehow, um, either, when you're a consultant, right? They listen to you before you get the job. And then when you're a consultant and you're in the job, they stop listening. So, and that's kind of what I've learned as well. So that's what I would tell him.
Amazing. So that covers both the personal and professional, I'd say.
I think so. I mean, I think personally, there's a lot of things that probably I was just too dumb to figure out, around relationships and what life and even what my dad was telling me, what was true about what he was saying and what was not, what was kind of things I could kind of fall by the wayside. Um, but yeah, I mean, in terms of that, I think where I was hanging out was really a testament to who I was as a person. I was hanging out in these scenes and, I look back through all this history. I have all these, documentaries and history books and stuff on music, especially. And I was part of a lot of that stuff. And if I just kind of remembered that I was a really kind of key man in a lot of those conversations, a lot of how that fabric of what we're looking at today in terms of how music was built. Of course, I wasn't around for the 50s or 60s, but come into like the late 70s and early 80s, I was kind of on fire.
So yeah, you mentioned you started on the media side of things. I'm curious, like how do you think being on the media side of things, especially early on in your career, has shaped the way that you evaluate artists as you got into the A&R scene and now as you've been doing it for some time?
I mean, it goes down to us telling stories. I think that's always been we've talked about this. It's like
Hmm.
if you can't tell a story around something that you love, people stop listening. If you just say, "Oh, I like this thing from that place," then that gets forgotten immediately. But if you could talk about the backstory or the vision for it, or even the meaning to you in terms of what it really meant to you and the experience that you've had with it, that goes a long way. And I think that's all journalism really truly is. It's like what your own eyes are telling you and sort of talking about the narrative around that, around your firsthand experience. All these sort of fantasy images on, uh, socials and, you know, third hand accounts of things that, become conspiracy theories. We've learned that just, those things aren't really reliable. So to rely on other people and to have that sort of platform with people that, and building that trust, I think that's the other thing is as an A&R person, I realize I'm only as good as the people that trust me and putting that trust into, artists put trust in me and then therefore, other folks that are surrounding them put trust in me. And that's the only way we can all move forward and sort of get to something that's really worth getting to.
Yeah, great answer. Next question. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and they are not always that bad. So, what's one secret you would like to share about the music industry?
Not a secret, but it sort of everyone doesn't really quite know this going in, but people hire people like themselves. Um, Not a great one, and I feel like that kind of I'm reminded of that a lot, especially when I look at the upper tiers of the industry and these all male, all Caucasian rooms, and I'm thinking like, okay, well, this is not really doesn't reflect what my reality is. But the actual secret that I like is kind of what I just was talking about is what really matters is earning trust, right? Um, the best deals in the business are built on that. They're not built on paperwork or even blood relationships. We're going to see in real time how that Paramount Dave Ellison thing goes. In terms of him and his daddy kind of building a media empire. I hope they hire some smart people that don't look like them and don't come from the same neighborhoods. But we'll see.
Mhm.
Um, but the real currency is that reputational aspect. The things that kind of move real conversations. And I see a lot of music or hear a lot of music and see a lot of artists and I've been encountering a lot of different aspects of media, including film and TV, which I'm fortunate to have had a hand in as well. And all those the best ones are those reputational transactions, if you want to call it that, but like, where someone really meets them, their kind of counterparts in a real setting that it's making real art, things that are meaningful, things that they challenge each other, I guess my thing. And
Mhm.
that only happens when they can trust each other and put faith in the fact that they're going to try to achieve the best possible outcome. And it's not just about like, them all going to the right schools or having the right, bank accounts or law degrees or whatever. It's really just the nuts and bolts stuff that makes really true great art.
Yeah, I feel like you're kind of touching on this a little bit, so I'm curious because I feel like some of these can be construed as like how managers can make mistakes in building an artist and building those relationships. What do you think is the biggest mistake that executives or managers today make when trying to develop an artist too early and trying to like build that relationship maybe too early?
I mean, I think the first thing for me learning the hard way was thinking it was going to be easy somehow. It never is. Um, no, I mean, I think the things that people get wrong are really sort of the things that I kind of spoke to earlier, which is not trusting in themselves, their own vision, or really putting together a vision and being exact with it. I think a lot of, and I'll say this about artists too, but artists, managers, labels, they sort of think that, it sounds good, so it's all going to happen, right? It's all going to just be fine because we all like that it sounds great. And that is part of it. That is a big piece of it. But that's a foundational aspect of the music business that, again, has to do with that storytelling. It's the kernel of the idea, and how you exploit or how you expand on that idea is really the key. And that's a real hard fought thing with an audience, especially, is to get other people to get that enthusiastic about it. There's so much passive music listening these days, so much passive consumption of everything that to get anyone's attention, I mean, I think Donald Glover says it all the time, like, who cares, right? Does anyone care about this? And until they do, then you don't have anything. And so I think the thing that most and this is maybe not true as true anymore because people are getting slapped upside the head day and night. You know, you put up a piece of music and you think, okay, everyone's going to love this,
Hmm.
and no one shows up. So I think you have to learn that lesson over and over again, just by default these days, that you have to get people's attention first. You have to attract them from a standpoint of some of that trust is earned, but also, the mistake of saying that someone's a loyal fan for the rest of their life just because they listened on TikTok or they hearted you on Spotify. It's just not enough.
Hmm.
I learned that having a loyal fan, um, I mean, that's the most hard-won relationship I think ever, especially now. So, and I think we've talked about this. It's like tickets and t-shirts. This is the business. This has always been the business. It'll always be the business. And I'm not saying literally tickets and t-shirts, but that kind of relationship when someone wants to put down their hard-earned money and say, I'm a fan of yours and I will follow you to the next location. Like deadheads. I think that's the most fascinating subculture on earth because I used to, yeah, I was a raver, right? So similar kind of thing, but the deadheads along that same path were even more dedicated. They would get in their car and they would drive to another location, right? What's that whole adage? Like, don't follow hippie to the second
Yeah.
location. But they would follow the band to the next stop, and then they would do the same thing. Have to see probably some of the same songs, buy some of the same food from the same people, and it's just a culture thing. But I think that's a fan base that you can't mess with. Those people are dedicated, and I always wanted to sort of engage with a fan base like that, and it's elusive. So yeah, it's
Mhm.
tough.
For sure. And I feel like to your point earlier, I mean, today's day and age, it's so hard to even pinpoint like the true dedicated loyal fans because even for like the mainstream artists, like Harry Styles just dropped an album or like Casey Musgraves comes out with a song. And like, I'm a huge fan of those artists, but maybe I listen to the new single like 20 times on repeat and then like I don't think I'll ever listen to it again. And I
Yeah.
feel like that the fan behavior has changed because maybe people wouldn't do that like 5 years ago. It's always
Well,
changing.
wouldn't the test be, and this is what I think most frontline artists today, or maybe some for good and some for bad. So I've had artists that would put out a record and nothing would happen the first week. And the testament of a record back when I started the labels, especially on the major side, was that first week. If you didn't attain a certain number, you were done. And so working with indie artists, we'd think, okay, I would think for them for their sake, like first week, oh my gosh. And then first week would kind of just drift. But like something would happen around 6 to 8 months, and those fans would show up and they'd be like, oh dude, have you heard the new No Such Thing record? Or have you
Mhm.
heard Flylo's thing? And he did this crazy show the other night, and I went back and listened to the whole record. And that's fans. Those are fans. That's the testament I think of a record is not just what it does the first week or when someone drops it, but over the course of history. And do you, as a Harry Styles fan, go back to that record and play it
Right.
again? I still play Led Zeppelin's records. Well, I still do. I was a 10-year-old, I think, right, when I discovered it, but I still go back. And I think that's being a fan is like when you actually have a record that sticks out in the lexicon of music.
And a lot of the albums that I replay today, I feel like did come out like 5, 10 years ago. I feel like the records that are coming out now, I listen to a lot when they come out, but then do I like put it on again a year from now? Not really. But
Yep,
yeah, it's interesting.
that's the test. Yeah.
Yeah. Final question. Throughout your career, you've been asked plenty of questions, whether it was being interviewed for an industry conference, the media, or even a promotion. What's one question you've been asked, but what's one question you have never been asked, but would like to have been asked, and what would be your answer?
I mean, this changes, but I think right now I'm thinking a lot about artist development, um, and whose job that is, I guess. Why is it always in the hands of someone like me as a manager or the artists themselves and their friends, right? I used to, kind of make fun of like bromagers, I called them, like bro managers, like kids that would get out of college at the same time. And one of them became the manager because um he had a phone. with enough, you know, enough minutes on it, or whatever the thing that was decided. But he became the manager. But I think that's kind of what it is like, why do so many artists with real talent just kind of keep falling through the cracks? And I think that's, it's a sore spot because I think it's a failure of the industry and how it's been built. Um, but it's also alignment of agendas, I think agendas are so misaligned right now. It's so misaligned for a while now that, DSPs had their own agenda. The labels have another agenda, managers, publishers, lawyers, artists, So if all those things are misaligned, then how does anything get done? So I think for me, it's putting some, and that's what my partner and I, Gary, and I've sort of trying to, been coming up with. He and I, started at the publishing company together and have kind of gone outside now to sort of start to, raise interest and hopefully some partnerships around this idea of realigning. And I don't think it's being predatory with an artist's career and trying to take everything off the table, but it's trying to align those things that they're trying to accomplish and put all those things back into alignment in terms of how they feed each other, how management and the label feed each other, how the label and the publishing arm feed each other. Because, producers, and it's been an age-old story, but producers have always been kind of the key person to what gets built, because
Right.
they're the only ones with enough. They have the studio. They probably have enough time that they can kind of hang out late at night and make stuff and like making stuff. So they end up working with younger frontline artists who are doing new things. And I think that's where the seed can be born. And I think that's what, so Gary and I've kind of come up with this idea of good egg. That's our name, right? That's our title. But the philosophy is just that. It's like putting something around that idea of like incubating it long enough. And we can always partner with other people. We can always go to the right manager or the right lawyer or the right label, hopefully all of them at the same time. Um, and that's what I learned management truly is, if you get it right, is realigning all those things. And a lot of managers, unfortunately, want to be label heads, so they just get out of whack. But if it's about the job description, and what I wish somebody would have asked me is like, when I left the major labels and why I left it is at that point, like, why are you leaving and what do you see? I would have said the same thing.
That's a great perspective. We've reached the end of the interview, but Todd, thanks again for joining me. It was great to have you on
Always.
the podcast.
Yeah, great. No, this is great, Rachel. I really appreciate the time and you hitting me up about this.
Of
I appreciate
course.
it.
Hey, it's me again. Thank you so much for tuning into tonight's episode. Before you go, make sure you're subscribed to the 3Q Podcast on YouTube and follow the 3Q Podcast on Instagram, Spotify, and LinkedIn. And don't forget to rate us 5 stars. See you next time.